You ever win something only to realize the cost was so high it actually felt like you lost? Like getting a promotion but losing all your friends in the process, or winning an argument but wrecking your relationship. Well, there's a name for that, and it comes from one of the most brilliant and maybe one of the most tragic warriors in all of history. His name was Pyrrhus, and his story is basically a masterclass in how winning can be the very worst thing that happens to you. So that kind of win has a name, a Pyrrhic victory. It's when a win just breaks you. You're the one left standing on the battlefield, sure, but you've lost so many soldiers, so many resources, that there's just no way you can fight again. You've basically won yourself into a corner. And the man who gave this whole idea its name, well, he learned that lesson the absolute hardest way possible. Just listen to these words. One more victory and we are undone. That was King Pyrrhus of Epirus, a man who people of the time said would have been the greatest general of his age if he'd just lived a little longer. So how on earth did a guy this brilliant, this successful, end up saying something so desperate? To get the answer, we gotta go all the way back to 281 BC. Pyrrhus is a king in a small Greek kingdom, and he gets this urgent message from across the sea, from Italy. It was a plea for help that would completely change the course of his life and give history one of its most famous phrases. Okay, so here's the deal. The Greek city of Tarentum was getting really nervous about the Roman Republic, which was just expanding like crazy. They needed a champion, and Pyrrhus, this super ambitious, restless king, was the perfect guy for the job. He agrees, but he's like, okay, but I'm in charge of everything. And in a pretty clever political move, the king of Macedon actually gives him 5,000 soldiers, basically just to get his ambitious rival out of his hair. So Pyrrhus sets sail, not just with a huge army, but with a secret weapon that Rome had never, ever seen before. And this is where things get really epic. This is a true clash of titans. On one side, you've got the Roman legions, disciplined, organized, flexible, and tough as nails from years of fighting in Italy. And on the other side, you've got Pyrrhus's Hellenistic army, a terrifying phalanx with these 16-foot-long pikes, a literal wall of pointy death, plus elite cavalry, and of course, his secret weapon, 20 war elephants. This was the old world of Alexander the Great going head-to-head with the brand-new rising power of Rome. At the Battle of Heraclea, the two armies finally meet, and Pyrrhus was apparently stunned by how organized the Romans were. He even said, "These don't look like barbarians to me." The battle itself was just a brutal, grinding meat grinder. The Roman legions were actually pushing his phalanx to the breaking point, but just when it seemed like his army was about to fold, Pyrrhus unleashed his secret weapon, the elephants, smashing into the Roman cavalry. The horses completely freaked out and bolted, and the whole Roman formation just shattered. So Pyrrhus won the day, yeah, but that victory was absolutely drenched in blood. The Romans lost a staggering 7,000 men, but Pyrrhus, he lost 4,000 of his own. And here's the crucial part. These weren't just random soldiers. They were his most experienced officers, his veteran troops, guys he could not easily replace, especially so far from home. This was the first real sign that his wins were coming at a price he just couldn't afford to pay. The very next year, they met again at Asculum. But here's the thing about the Romans. They learn. And they learn fast. They came prepared this time, with 300 special anti-elephant wagons armed with big iron spikes and missile troops. The battle raged for 2 whole bloody days. And in the end, once again, Pyrrhus's tactical genius and the sheer force of his army pulled out a very, very narrow victory. But the pattern was just repeating, and it was getting worse. Another win, another 6,000 Romans dead. But for Pyrrhus, it meant another 3,500 of his irreplaceable veterans were gone forever. And it's at this moment, as he's looking out over the battlefield littered with the bodies of his best friends and his commanders, that he's said to have uttered those famous words, "One more victory and we are undone." He had won the battle, but he knew, deep down, he was losing the war. And you know, those incredibly costly victories in Italy, they weren't some fluke. They were the defining pattern of his entire life. Pyrrhus was a king who could conquer absolutely anything, but he couldn't hold on to a single thing. He was driven by this restless ambition that saw every win not as a foundation to build on, but just as a launchpad for the next gamble. I mean, just look at the timeline of his career. It is dizzying. Right after those brutal battles in Italy, he just abandons the campaign to go invade Sicily. Then he's back in Italy only to get beaten. Then he conquers the entire kingdom of Macedonia only to ditch that to go invade Sparta. It's just a career of constant conquest without any consolidation. It's a testament to a guy who is brilliant, but also fatally flawed.
In Sicily, he was at first welcomed as a liberator, a hero, right? He was there to fight the Carthaginians, and he won victory after victory, pushing them back. But to pay for all this, he imposed harsh taxes, he forced people into his army, and pretty soon the same people who called him a hero started seeing him as a tyrant. He was eventually forced to just flee the island.
And then there's Macedonia. In this absolutely brilliant campaign, he beats his rival Antigonus and takes the throne. The Macedonian soldiers, who just admired his skill, flocked to his side. He had the whole kingdom in his grasp, and then another adventure called. He just left to go chase more glory somewhere else, without ever finishing the job. And that little adventure led him to one of his most stunning defeats. He marches on Sparta, which was basically undefended, thinking it's going to be an easy win. But the city's women refused to leave. Led by a woman named Archidamia, they said they had no desire to live if Sparta fell. They worked all night digging trenches, building defenses, and basically shaming the men into fighting with this renewed passion. And Pyrrhus, one of the greatest generals alive, was held off by a city defended by its women. Incredible. So this string of brilliant but ultimately pointless campaigns brings us to the end of his life. And for a guy who lived a life of epic battles and grand conquests, you'd expect a grand ending, right? Well, his death was anything but glorious. It was bizarre, chaotic, almost darkly funny, really. He ends up in the city of Argos, taking sides in some local political squabble. I mean, think about that. A petty dispute for a man who battled Rome and conquered Macedonia. His army gets trapped in these narrow city streets, and it just turns into this chaotic, messy brawl, the total opposite of an organized battlefield. The way it happens is just unbelievable. His retreating army gets jammed up in a gateway. Pyrrhus, always the worrier, gets into a one-on-one duel with some young soldier. The soldier's mom, watching from a roof, sees her son is in danger and just throws a roof tile. It hits the great king right on the head, stuns him, and knocks him off his horse. And right there, dazed on the ground in some dirty street, Pyrrhus of Ypres, the man they called the Eagle, was unceremoniously killed. So, what are we supposed to make of this guy? His soldiers called him the Eagle because of how amazing he was on the battlefield. But his life is this incredible, dramatic lesson in the difference between just winning and winning what actually matters. This right here is the fundamental paradox of Pyrrhus. On one hand, an absolutely brilliant tactician, a master of the battlefield who could inspire incredible loyalty in his men. But on the other hand, a deeply flawed strategist. He had no long-term plan, no vision beyond the next battle, the next conquest. The Eagle, who could soar over any army, died not in a blaze of glory, but from a piece of pottery in a back-alley brawl. So why do we still talk about him over 2,000 years later? Well, he really represents the end of an era, that last flicker of the Alexander the Great warrior king ideal. He gave Rome its first real test against a truly world-class general, and most importantly, his name is now forever tied to this idea of a victory that costs way too much. It's a timeless lesson that talent and ambition are pretty much meaningless if you don't have a sustainable plan. Which really leaves us with one final question to think about. The life of Pyrrhus forces us to ask, what really is the difference between winning a battle and actually winning a war?